You know what they say about underestimating people. Well, my in-laws learned that lesson the hard way. What started as the most humiliating moment of my life turned into the sweetest revenge story you'll ever hear. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why sometimes the best response to disrespect isn't words. It's actions that speak louder than anything they could ever say. Picture this. It's supposed to be the happiest day of your life. You're standing there in your wedding dress, surrounded by family and friends, about to marry the love of your life. Everything should be perfect, right? Well, that's exactly what I thought until my new mother-in-law decided to turn my wedding into her personal stage for the most devastating public humiliation I've ever experienced. But here's the thing about rock bottom: it gives you a solid foundation to build your comeback. And oh boy, did I build a comeback that nobody saw coming. Are you ready for a story about love, betrayal, family drama, and the kind of revenge that's so satisfying it'll give you chills? Because what happened next will blow your mind. Let me take you back to that day. My name is Sarah, and I was marrying David, the man I thought I'd spend forever with. We'd been together for 3 years, and while his family had always been somewhat cold toward me, I figured it was just because they were protective of their son. You know how some families can be, right? They need time to warm up to the new person in their precious child's life. David's parents, Robert and Margaret, owned several successful businesses in our city. They were what you'd call old money, the kind of people who judge you by your last name, your zip code, and whether you went to the right schools. I, on the other hand, came from a middle-class family. My parents worked hard to provide for us, but we definitely weren't wealthy. I was a teacher, passionate about my job, but certainly not making the kind of money that impressed people like the Hartwell family. The wedding planning had been stressful from the beginning. Margaret had opinions about everything: the flowers, the venue, the menu, even my dress. She'd make these little comments like, "Oh, are you sure you can afford the premium package? Or maybe we should look at something more budget-friendly." But David always defended me, or so I thought. The venue we chose was beautiful, a charming garden pavilion that wasn't the most expensive option, but was perfect for us. It had this romantic, intimate feel with string lights and a gorgeous view of the lake. I'd fallen in love with it the moment I saw it, and David agreed it was perfect. The total cost was around $25,000, which was a stretch for us, but we'd saved up and were making it work. But here's where things get interesting. And trust me, you're going to want to hear every detail of what happened next, because this is where the story takes a turn that nobody could have predicted. The morning of the wedding, I was getting ready with my bridesmaids, feeling nervous but excited. My maid of honor, Jessica, kept telling me how beautiful I looked and how lucky David was. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon, followed by cocktails and dinner. About 150 guests were expected, a nice mix of both families and our friends. As I was putting on my dress, my phone rang. It was David, and he sounded stressed. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said. "There's been a situation with the venue payment." My heart dropped. "What kind of situation?" "The venue is saying they never received the final payment. They're threatening to cancel the wedding." I felt the blood drain from my face. "But we paid that 2 weeks ago. I have the receipt." I know. I'm trying to sort it out, but they want cash today or they won't let us use the space." The amount they wanted was $8,000 money. We simply didn't have readily available. Our savings were tapped out from the wedding expenses, and this was supposed to have been handled already. I was panicking, my bridesmaids were trying to calm me down, and guests were already starting to arrive. That's when David's parents showed up at the bridal suite. Margaret walked in without knocking, took one look at my tear-streaked face, and said, "What's all this drama about?" When David explained the situation, Robert just shook his head. "This is what happens when you try to plan a wedding on a shoestring budget," he said. "You should have accepted our offer to pay for everything from the beginning." Margaret nodded in agreement. "We told David he should have married someone from a better family, someone who could actually afford to throw a proper wedding." I felt like I'd been slapped. Here I was, in my wedding dress, 2 hours before the ceremony, and they were basically saying I wasn't good enough for their son. But the worst part, David didn't defend me. He just stood there, looking uncomfortable but not saying a word. Jessica stepped forward. "With all due respect, Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, this isn't the time or place for "Oh, please," Margaret interrupted. "This is exactly the time and place. This whole situation is embarrassing. Our friends are out there, and what are we supposed to tell them? That the wedding is canceled because the bride couldn't afford to pay the venue." Robert pulled out his checkbook. "We'll cover it," he said, "but everyone's going to know that we had to bail out this whole disaster." And that's exactly what they did. But it gets so much worse. Are you feeling that secondhand embarrassment yet? Because trust me, this is just the beginning. The ceremony went ahead, but I felt humiliated. During the cocktail hour, I overheard Margaret talking to her sister about how she had to rescue the wedding because David married someone beneath his station. She wasn't even trying to keep her voice down. But the real kicker came during the reception. After dinner, when it was time for toasts, Robert stood up with his glass. Traditional father of the groom speech, right? Wrong. I'd like to make a toast, he began, his voice carrying across the room. To my new daughter-in-law Sarah. Has been quite an adventure, hasn't it? We've learned that love doesn't always come with a price tag, but weddings certainly do. A few people chuckled, thinking it was going to be a sweet speech about love being priceless. Oh, how wrong they were. Sarah, you've taught us all a valuable lesson today about the importance of financial planning. When David told us he was marrying a teacher, we knew it would be a challenge. Teachers do such important work, but we all know they don't make much money. The room was getting uncomfortable. People were shifting in their seats, not sure where this was going. But don't worry, Robert continued. The Hartwell family has always been generous with those less fortunate. We were happy to step in today and save the day when Sarah's family couldn't quite manage the financial responsibilities of hosting a proper wedding. My face was burning. My parents looked mortified. David was staring at his plate, still not saying anything to defend me. So here's to Sarah. Robert raised his glass higher. May she learn to live within her means and never forget how lucky she is to marry into a family that can afford to support her lifestyle. The room was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. I felt like I was going to throw up, but I managed to smile and raise my glass, because what else could I do? My wedding was being broadcast to 150 people as a charity case. Margaret then stood up and added, and let's hope that David doesn't. I have to keep rescuing his broke little wife from her financial mistakes. That word broke hit me like a physical blow. Several people gasped audibly. My own maid of honor looked like she wanted to throw her drink at them. But here's the thing about humiliation. It can either break you or fuel you. And in that moment, sitting there in my wedding dress, being called broke in front of everyone I cared about, something inside me snapped. Not in a breakdown way, but in a game-on way. I stood up, still smiling, and said, "Thank you so much for those kind words, Robert and Margaret. I'll never forget this moment or this generous lesson about family values." The rest of the evening was a blur. People were kind to me, but I could see the pity in their eyes. Some guests even approached me later to say how inappropriate the speech was, but the damage was done. My wedding day would forever be remembered as the day I was publicly humiliated by my in-laws. David tried to apologize later that night, but his words felt empty. They were just stressed about the money situation. He said, "You know how they are." "No, David," I replied. "I know how they are now. The question is, do you?" That night, as I lay in bed in my hotel room alone, because David had gone to talk to his parents, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to be the poor little teacher who got rescued by the rich family. I was going to show them exactly what this broke woman was capable of. But first, I had to figure out what had really happened with that venue payment, because something about that whole situation didn't add up. The timing was too convenient, and the venue's sudden demand for cash seemed suspicious. The next morning, I called the venue directly and asked to speak to the manager. What I discovered made my blood boil. The payment had been received exactly when we'd sent it, but someone had called 2 days before the wedding and requested that they hold the payment and claim it was never received. Who called? I asked. I'm not supposed to say, but since it caused so much trouble, it was someone claiming to be from the groom's family. They said they wanted to surprise the couple by upgrading the package, but they needed us to create a situation where they could step in and pay. The setup was deliberate. David's parents had orchestrated the entire situation to humiliate me and make themselves look like heroes. The question was, did David know? When I confronted him, his reaction told me everything I needed to know. He didn't deny it. He just said, "Sarah, they were trying to help. They thought if they could show you how much easier things would be if you just let them handle the finances, so you knew." I knew they were planning something, but I didn't think they'd be so, public about it. That's when I realized my marriage was over before it had even really begun. The man I thought I loved had let his parents orchestrate my public humiliation. He'd stood by and watched them call me broke, knowing it was all a setup. But here's where the story gets really good. Remember how I said this humiliation would fuel the greatest comeback story? Well, buckle up, because what I did next was absolutely diabolical in the best possible way. I didn't file for divorce immediately. Instead, I played the long game. I went back to work, smiled when people asked about married life, and started planning my revenge. Because you see, there was something David's family didn't know about me. Something I'd never told them because I'm not the type of person who flaunts wealth or connections. My grandmother, who had passed away 6 months before the wedding, had left me a substantial inheritance. I'm talking about enough money to buy a house, pay off student loans, and still have plenty left over. But the will was complex, and the estate was still being settled. I'd told David about it, but I'd asked him to keep it private because I didn't want his family to know. I wanted them to get to know me for who I was, not what I might inherit. The inheritance was finalized 3 weeks after the wedding. $1.2 million. Not enough to make me rich by Robert and Margaret standards, but certainly enough to make a statement. I spent the next week researching everything I could about the Hartwell family businesses. I discovered that Robert's main company was struggling more than he let on. They'd been operating on credit and reputation for months, and several of their major contracts were up for renewal. But more importantly, I learned something very interesting about the venue where we'd had our wedding. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was getting ready to retire and had been quietly looking for someone to buy the business. The asking price, $800,000. Are you starting to see where this is going? Because what happened next was so satisfying that I still smile thinking about it. I called Mrs. Chen and arranged a meeting. I told her I was interested in purchasing the venue, and we began negotiations. She was asking $800,000, but the property was worth more than that. The location was prime real estate, and the business had a solid reputation and consistent bookings. Within 2 weeks, I'd made an offer she couldn't refuse. Full asking price, cash. With a quick closing, she was thrilled to have such a straightforward sale, and we closed on the property exactly 1 month after my wedding. But buying the venue was just the first step. The real revenge was much more elaborate than that. The same day I took ownership, I sent a letter to Robert and Margaret. It was delivered by a courier, formal and professional. The letter read, "Dear Robert and Margaret, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to reach out to thank you once again for your generous contribution to our wedding. Your words about the importance of financial responsibility have really stayed with me. I'm writing to inform you that I've recently made a significant business investment that I thought you'd be interested to hear about. I've purchased the Lakeside Garden Pavilion, yes, the same venue where you so graciously saved our wedding. I wanted you to be among the first to know, because I've decided to rename it. The venue will now be called the Hartwell Pavilion, in honor of the valuable lesson you taught me about money management and family support. I'm also pleased to inform you that I'll be implementing some new policies. Given your expressed concerns about people living within their means, I've decided to require all future clients to provide proof of financial stability before booking events. I wouldn't want anyone to experience the embarrassment of having their event rescued by family members. Additionally, I've instructed my staff to share the story of our wedding with all potential clients. As an example of how not to handle event planning, I think it's important that people understand the consequences of poor financial planning. I hope you'll consider hosting future family events at the Hartwell Pavilion. I'd be happy to offer you a special rate after all. It's the least I can do for the people who taught me so much about the value of money. With gratitude for your financial wisdom. Sarah Hartwell, P.S. I've enclosed a check for $8,000. The amount you so generously contributed to our wedding. I believe it's important to pay one's debts promptly. Can you imagine their faces when they read that letter? But I wasn't done yet. Oh no, the best part was still to come. I had the venue's website redesigned to include a section called Our Story that featured photos from weddings held at the venue. Prominently displayed were photos from my wedding, along with a detailed account of how the venue had been rescued by generous family members when the bride couldn't afford the payment. But here's the really beautiful part. I made sure to include audio clips of Robert's speech. With his permission, of course, I had it written into the venue's standard contract that speeches could be used for promotional purposes. His words about supporting those less fortunate and calling me broke were now permanent fixtures on the website. I also created a scholarship program through the venue called the Broke Teacher Fund that would help educators afford their dream weddings. The description read, "Inspired by the generous spirit of the Hartwell family. This program assists teachers and other public servants who might otherwise be unable to afford their perfect wedding day." The story spread through their social circle like wildfire. Remember, these people lived for gossip and social status. Suddenly, everyone knew that the broke teacher they'd humiliated had bought the venue and turned their speeches into a public monument to their own classlessness, but the revenge didn't stop there. I started receiving calls from other wedding venues in the area. Word had gotten out that I was the new owner of Lakeside Garden Pavilion, and several other venue owners were interested in selling to me. Apparently, I'd gained a reputation as a serious buyer who could close deals quickly. Within 6 months, I'd purchased 3 more venues. I was becoming a legitimate businesswoman in the wedding industry, and my success was making waves in the local business community. David's parents' friends started canceling their business relationships with Robert's company. Turns out, publicly humiliating someone at their own wedding isn't good for business reputation. Who knew? The final nail in the coffin came when I received a call from Robert himself. His voice was strained, different from the confident man who'd given that speech at my wedding. "Sarah," he said, "I think we need to talk." "Of course, Robert, what can I do for you? This situation has gotten out of hand. Margaret and I think maybe we should all sit down and discuss this like adults." "I'm not sure what you mean," I replied innocently. "What situation?" "The venue, the website, the scholarship program, all of it. People are talking, and it's affecting our business." "Oh, I see. Well, Robert, I'm just a broke teacher who's trying to make the best of the financial wisdom you shared with me. Remember, you said I should learn to live within my means and never forget how lucky I am to have family support. Sarah, please. We may have spoken harshly at the wedding, but harshly, I interrupted. Robert, you called me broke in front of 150 people. You orchestrated a fake payment crisis to humiliate me on my wedding day. You made my parents feel ashamed for not being wealthy enough to impress you. And your son, my husband, let you do it. There was silence on the other end of the line. But don't worry, I continued. I'm not angry, I'm grateful. Your actions taught me exactly what kind of people you are and what kind of man I married. That's invaluable information. What do you want? He asked quietly. I want you to experience what it feels like to be publicly humiliated by people who claim to love you. I want you to understand what it's like to have your worth questioned in front of everyone you care about. I want you to know how it feels to be called names by family members who are supposed to support you. And David. David made his choice. At the wedding, he chose you over me. He chose to let his parents humiliate his wife rather than defend her. That tells me everything I need to know about our marriage. The divorce papers were filed the next week. David tried to fight for half of my inheritance, but good luck with that. The money was mine before the marriage, and I had excellent legal representation, the kind that money can buy. But here's the thing that really gets me. Throughout this entire ordeal, David never once apologized for letting his parents treat me that way. He kept saying things like they were just trying to help and you're overreacting. Even when I showed him proof that they'd orchestrated the payment crisis, he defended them. That's when I knew I'd made the right choice. A man who won't defend his wife on their wedding day isn't worth keeping around. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. By then, I owned 4 wedding venues and had started a successful business consulting other women who wanted to break into the wedding industry. My story had become somewhat legendary, the teacher who got called broke and turned it into a business empire. But the most satisfying part of all this, the social consequences for the Hartwell family. Their behavior at my wedding had been so outrageous that it became a cautionary tale in their social circle. People stopped inviting them to events because nobody wanted to be associated with people who would publicly humiliate a bride at her own wedding. Robert's business suffered significantly. Several major clients terminated their contracts, citing concerns about his character and judgment. Margaret's charity work dried up because organizations didn't want to be associated with someone who had such a public display of cruelty. And David learned what it was like to be on the receiving end of his parents' judgment. When he tried to date other women, word had gotten out about what happened at our wedding. Turns out, most decent women don't want to marry into a family that would treat them that way. The venues I bought have been incredibly successful. The Hartwell Pavilion, in particular, has become one of the most popular wedding venues in the area. Couples love the story of how it was purchased by a woman who refused to let her in-laws define her worth. I've kept the Our Story section on the website, and it's become a selling point. Couples tell me they want to have their wedding at the place where someone stood up to bullies and refused to be diminished. The scholarship program has helped. Over 50 teachers and public servants afford their dream weddings. Each scholarship recipient gets a plaque with the inscription, "Never let anyone make you feel small for doing important work." As for Robert and Margaret, they eventually moved out of state. The social consequences of their behavior became too much to bear. Before they left, Margaret actually called me to apologize. She cried on the phone and said she'd never meant for things to go so far. I was trying to protect David, she said. I thought if I could show him how different your backgrounds were, he might reconsider. Margaret, I replied, you didn't protect David. You showed him that it's acceptable to let people humiliate the person he claims to love. You taught him that money matters more than character. You didn't save him from anything, you ruined his chance at happiness. She hung up crying. Looking back now, 2 years later, I can honestly say that Robert and Margaret did me the biggest favor of my life. They showed me who they really were, and who David really was before I wasted decades in a marriage that would never have worked. I'm now engaged to a wonderful man named Marcus, who teaches high school math. When I told him about the venue business and how I started it, he laughed and said, "So you're telling me that some rich people were mean to you and you responded by becoming more successful than them? That's the most attractive thing I've ever heard." Marcus doesn't care about money or social status. He cares about character and kindness. When his parents met me, they were impressed by my business success, but they were more impressed by my dedication to helping other people achieve their dreams. The wedding venues continue to thrive. I've expanded to include event planning services and have written a book about turning personal setbacks into business success. The book's title, From Broke to Boss: How My In-Laws' Insults Built My Empire. But you know what the best part is? Every time someone books the Hartwell Pavilion for their wedding, they hear the story of how the venue got its name. They learn about the woman who was called broke at her own wedding and how she turned that humiliation into triumph. The story has become part of the venue's charm. Couples love the idea of having their wedding at a place that represents standing up for yourself and refusing to be diminished by others. And every month, I get letters from other women who've heard my story and found the courage to stand up to their own bullies. Teachers who were told they weren't good enough. Daughters-in-law who were made to feel small. Women who were judged for their background or their bank account. They tell me that my story gave them the strength to value themselves and demand better treatment from the people in their lives. That's worth more than any amount of money. So, to anyone listening to this story who has ever been made to feel small, who has ever been called names by people who should love and support you, who has ever been judged for not having enough money or the right background, remember this: your worth is not determined by other people's opinions or bank accounts. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are actually giving us the greatest gift. They're showing us exactly who they are and what we deserve, better than Robert and Margaret thought they were putting me in my place. Instead, they put me on a path to success I never would have found otherwise. The wedding industry has been incredibly rewarding. I love helping couples create their perfect day, and I especially love helping people who might be struggling financially. The scholarship program has become a model for other businesses, and I've been invited to speak at conferences about using personal experiences to build successful enterprises. But beyond the business success, this experience taught me something invaluable about relationships and family. A partner who truly loves you will defend you, especially when you're being attacked by their own family. A family that truly accepts you won't try to humiliate you to prove a point. David's failure to defend me at our wedding wasn't just a moment of weakness, it was a glimpse into what our entire marriage would have been like. I would have spent years being the family scapegoat, the one they blamed for every problem, the one who was never quite good enough. Instead, I'm building a life with someone who sees my worth and celebrates my success. Marcus was actually at one of my business conference presentations when we met. He came up afterward and said, "I have to know, you really as impressive as you seem, or is this just a really good presentation?" I laughed and said, "Why don't you stick around and find out?" He's been sticking around ever since, and he's seen me at my best and my worst. He's seen me make tough business decisions, and he's seen me cry over the letters I receive from women who've been treated poorly by their families. He's seen me work 8-hour days to make sure a couple's wedding is perfect, and he's seen me spend my own money to help someone who can't afford their dream venue. Through it all, he's been supportive and proud. He tells people about my business success, but he also tells them about the scholarship program and the letters from women who've found courage through my story. That's what a real partner does. They celebrate your victories and support your mission. They don't stand by while their family humiliates you, and they certainly don't defend people who treat you poorly. The venues now employ over 40 people, and we've hosted more than 300 weddings. Each one is special, but the ones that mean the most to me are the scholarship recipients. Seeing a teacher or a social worker or a nurse get their dream wedding. Knowing that someone else's cruelty was transformed into their joy, that's the real victory. I still have Robert's speech recorded, and sometimes I listen to it when I need motivation. His words about me being broke and less fortunate remind me how far I've come and how wrong people can be when they judge others based on superficial things. The phrase "broke little wife" has become something of a joke among my friends and employees. They'll say things like "the broke little wife just closed another deal" or "the broke little wife is expanding to 3 more cities." It's our way of reclaiming the insult and turning it into a badge of honor. But you know what? I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. Robert and Margaret's cruelty led me to a life I never would have imagined. I'm successful, happy, and surrounded by people who value me for who I am. I'm helping other women achieve their dreams, and I'm building something meaningful. Would I change what happened at my wedding? Maybe. It was humiliating and painful, and it hurt my parents terribly. But it also led me to discover strengths I didn't know I had, and to build a life I absolutely love. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes the people who try to tear you down actually lift you up to heights you never would have reached on your own. If you're going through something similar, if someone has made you feel small or worthless, remember this story. Remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or prejudices. Remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and proving the haters wrong. Don't let anyone call you broke financially, emotionally, or spiritually. You have value, you have worth, and you have the power to build something beautiful from even the ugliest situations. The next time someone tries to humiliate you, remember the woman who was called broke at her own wedding and turned that insult into a business empire. Remember that your setbacks can become your comebacks, and your pain can become your power. Because that's exactly what happened to me. And if it can happen to a broke little teacher, it can happen to anyone. What do you think about this story? Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to make you feel small? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our stories helps other people find the courage to stand up for themselves too. And remember, if you're planning a wedding and looking for a venue that celebrates standing up for yourself and refusing to be diminished, the Hartwell Pavilion would be honored to host your special day. After all, every love story deserves a happy ending, especially the ones that start with someone being brave enough to demand